So in this video, we're going to do more practice on the 4 ways to solve quadratics, and this is from my quick review series. So in this video, we're going to do all of these problems that you see here and all of these problems that you see here. So this video continues extra practice exercises from my review video on the same topic. So if you want to see a full breakdown of the 4 ways to solve quadratics, I recommend you look in the description of this video. I'll drop a link there. And by the way, you can get a free PDF version of all of these problems with an answer key at dividingconquermath.com. Just go to the review section. So I am just going to plow through these problems because I talked about kind of the idea behind approaching all of these in my other video. So I'm just going to get going with these. So you can pause if you want to try these on your own, but otherwise I'm just going to get moving. Okay, so for this first one, so I've got x squared equals 10x plus 75. So the first thing that you just want to get used to when you're working with quadratics is you want to just have everything collected to one side so that you can kind of make a game plan. So we are really used to looking at quadratics like this, and so this is not necessarily that helpful. So the next thing now that I'm thinking about is, can I factor this? And off the top of my head, I might, it actually isn't like coming up right away for me. But here's the thing, I think I might be able to factor this, and factoring tends to be the easiest method. So I'm going to spend an extra minute thinking about whether or not I can factor this. So I need to make negative 75. So I need two things that multiply to negative 75 but add to negative 10. So if I think about this, so what would be some things? So like negative 25 and positive 3. Okay, that's definitely not going to make negative 10. But what about, how about negative 15 and 5? Oh, that'll work, right? So yeah, so negative 15 plus 5 will make negative 10. So this will 100% factor. So I will spend an extra second just checking this because factoring is the quickest way to do this. So this will be x minus 15 and x plus 5, and then boom, we're done. So this is x equals 15 and x equals negative 5. Okay, so now for B, so this one might look kind of scary because it's got fractions in it, but I'm actually going to tell you a trick, and I didn't talk about this in the review video. So because it has fractions in it, of course we're not going to deal with the fractions. So instead what we're going to do is, of course, we're just going to clear them out first. So we are going to find the LCD of all the fractions here, which in this case would be 20. And so then I will just go ahead and multiply every single part of this problem by the 20. So remember that includes even the x squared. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up. So this is 20 times 3 over 10. Okay, and technically this 0 even gets multiplied by 20, but it just will equal 0, right? So I've multiplied every single part of the problem by 20. And so now we just see what we're left with. So 20 times x squared will give me, let me change my color. This will give me 20x squared. For this next one, these 20s will cancel out. So this is just going to leave me with 7x. And then for this next one, so 10, let's see, oops, I'm not sure where the 10 went. 10 goes into 20 2 times, and 2 times 3 is 6. So here's my new problem. Okay, so now it's kind of like, what do we do with this, right? Does it factor? So I am unsure if it's going to factor. I could, of course, always use the AC method for it, but it's going to take me a little while to figure that out. So in this case, I also don't want to use completing the square because I would have to divide everything by 20 first. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go ahead and use the quadratic formula. So for the quadratic formula, I need to identify what's in the A position, so that's 20. What's in the B position, that's negative 7. And what's in the C position, and so that is negative 6. And so the quadratic formula is this right here, so you can pause the video if you want to write that down or read that over. I'm just going to go ahead and use it. So this is going to be negative 7, so that's 7, plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared, which is 49, minus 4 times A times C over 2A. Oops, sorry, 2 times A, which is 2 times 20. Okay, so let's make some space to keep going with this. Okay, So now, as I keep going with this, so this is 7 plus or minus the square root of, so 49 minus all of this, so this actually becomes 49 plus 480, all of this over 40. So then this is 7 plus or minus the square root of 529 over 40. And so the square root of 529, this one's actually kind of a tough one. It actually does exist. It is 23. So this is going to be x equals 7 plus or minus, let's see, maybe I'll continue this up here. X equals 7 plus or minus just 23 over 40. And so then I can break this into two separate cases. So we have x equals 7 plus 23 over 40. So that's going to be 30 over 40. So that's going to be 3 over 4. And then we have x equals 7 minus 23 over 40. So that's going to be negative 16 over 40, and so that will simplify to negative 2 over 5. So running out of space there, but hopefully you can see it all. So yeah, so my two solutions were 3/4 and negative 2/5. Okay, so now I've got x squared minus 10x plus 6. So for this one, so this definitely does not factor. I know that right away. You can prove that to yourself. You can look at the factors of 6. But I think the best method for this would be completing the square, because as we just saw with the last example, right, the quadratic formula takes forever. This is divisible by 2, and so that's usually the ideal thing for completing the square. So to complete the square, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to isolate the number to one side, and then the number attached to the x is my b. So my b is negative 10. That makes my half b 5, and my half b squared is 25. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that 25 to each side in this case. So I have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals, so negative 6 plus 25 is going to be 19. Okay, so from here, now I can factor. So this will be x minus 5 squared. Now, if you're ever unsure of how to factor this, you can always refer to this half b here. This is always the part that you're going to factor with. Okay, and so this is going to equal 19, and from here we use the square root property. So to use the square root property, I take the square root of both sides, but when I take the square root of the number, I always put a plus or minus in front. So I get x minus 5 equals plus or minus the square root of 19. Kind of running out of room here, but let's see, I'll just kind of write the final answer up here. So the final answer, you can see it up here on the top right. This will be 5 plus or minus the square root of 19. And so that'll be the answer for that one. Okay, so for D here, so this one's actually kind of fun because you could really either use the square root property or factoring. So I'll just show you both because it's really quick. So if I wanted to factor it, I could factor this as x minus 7, x plus 7. And so my answers here would be 7 and negative 7. But what I notice for a lot of students is that they look at this and they want to just bring the 49 over to the other side. And so if you bring the 49 over to the other side, so then you can use the square root property. The one thing that you want to make sure that you do, though, is don't forget when you use the square root property, you have to put a plus or minus in front of the square root. So this will be x equals plus or minus 7. So same answer as before. Okay, so for E here, so E actually also does not factor. So at first when you look at it, you might think that it's going to factor, but it actually won't because this is a negative 1. So if this were positive 1, it would factor, but it won't factor as is. And so since this 2 is divisible by 1/2 or divisible by 2, I think completing the square is the best option here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take x squared minus 2x equals 1, and then we can go ahead and set up our completing the square. So the negative 2, right, the number that's attached to the x is always the b, and then I can take half of that, so that's going to be negative 1, and then square that, so that's going to equal 1. So that 1 will be added to both sides. So this becomes x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 2. And then I can factor this as x minus 1 squared equals 2. So as a reminder, if you are unsure what should go here, it's always this 1/2 b. And now we can go ahead and solve. So I can go ahead and use the square root property. But when I use the square root property, I need to put plus or minus in front of the number. Obviously, I can't take the square root of 2, so I'm just going to leave it alone. So this is going to become x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 2. I'm running out of space here, so I just need to add that 1 over to the other side. So I get 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. That's going to be my answer. Okay, so continuing on. So now I've got 2x plus 1 squared equals 25. So this one is just screaming for the square root property. It's already set up to use the square root property. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. That's all we really need to do. So this is going to be 2x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 25. The square root of 25 is 5, so we can just evaluate that. Now, when this is a number, you want to split this into two separate cases. So here's what I mean. This can be 2x plus 1 equals 5, and 2x plus 1 equals negative 5. Now, if this were a square root, then we may or may not break this into separate cases. Kind of depends on the context. So a lot of homework systems will make you break this into two separate cases. But when you have a straight up number, you should break this into two separate cases to figure it out. So now I can go ahead and just subtract 1 from all sides. So I get 2x equals 4 in this case, and 2x equals negative 6 in the other case. Divide everything by 2. So I'll write my answers up here. X equals 2 and x equals negative 3 are going to be my two answers. By the way, if you're finding this content helpful, I would love it if you would hit that like button. Leave me a comment just to let me know how things are going, or maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. That would be super great. Okay, so continuing on here, so now I've got x squared plus 12x equals negative 33. So again, I can't really figure out what is going on here until I get everything on one side. It just helps my brain to figure out if we can do anything with this. Okay, so I've got x squared plus 12x plus 33. So the factors of 33 are 33 and 1, or 3 and 11. So none of these are going to make 12 for us. So this will not factor, right? So I've got to use another method. But again, this is divisible by 2. So I think, once again, this is a great candidate for completing the square. So actually, ironically, we actually just need to get rid of all this and go back to the original statement. So here I've got the number isolated. And so now I can just start completing the square right here. Okay, so my b will be 12. Half of that will be 6. And half of that squared will be 36. So I'll add that to both sides. So this will be x squared plus 12x plus 36 equals negative 33 plus 36. And so then this will become x plus 6 squared equals 3. And then I can go ahead and take the square root of both sides. And when I take the square root of both sides, I want to take plus or minus of the number. So this becomes x plus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 3. And so then I have x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 3. So I just bring this 6 over to the other side. Okay, so up next, now I've got this x squared equals 7x plus 2. So let's bring everything over to one side. Okay, so this is definitely not going to factor. Also, this number here is not divisible by 2, so we're going to have to use the quadratic formula in this case. So I need to identify what's my a, b, and c. So my a is 1, my b is negative 7, and my c is negative 2. And so once again, so I'll just show you, this is the quadratic formula. So I am just going to go ahead and bust this out, but you can pause the video if you want to write it down or read it over. Okay, so this is going to be x equals 7, so negative 7 becomes positive 7, plus or minus the square root of, so 7 squared is 49, minus 4ac, so plug those pieces in, over 2a. Okay, so there's all my pieces. So this is going to be 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 plus 8 over 2. Okay, so I need more space. Okay, so then this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 57 over 2. And the square root of 57 cannot be broken down any farther, so this is really as good as it gets. So then it's just a matter of how you need to present your final answer. So you might have to break this into two separate cases, in the plus case and the minus case. Or alternatively, another way that you could write this would be 7 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 57 over 2. Just kind of depends on the context. Okay, and so for this last one, so I've got 3x squared minus 5x minus 2. So for this one actually will factor. And if you're not sure, I'll just review the AC method here. I talk about the AC method a lot more in my factoring video. So if you want a review of that, you can check that out. Check that one out. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two numbers. So 3 times negative 2, that equals negative 6. So what I want are two numbers that multiply to negative 6, but add to negative 5. So let's see if that exists. So when I think about my factors of negative 6, the first one that actually comes into mind is negative 6 and 1. And negative 6 plus 1 will indeed equal negative 5. So that's actually what I'm going to use. So when we use the AC method, we use those two factors that you just discovered. You use those to break up the middle term. So this is going to be 3x squared minus 6x plus x minus 2 equals 0. And so now notice, right, negative 6x plus 5x equals negative 5x. So I've just rewritten this problem. But now what I can do from here is I can use grouping. So I can factor out 3x from here. So then this becomes x minus 2. I'll just factor 1 out of here just so I have a placeholder. And this becomes x minus 2. And by the way, I go through this grouping stuff. I go through, like, I assume that you know this. So I go through this grouping stuff in detail in my factoring video. So check that out if you are not sure. You don't have to use this technique, by the way. You could have just figured this out. I'm just reviewing this in case anybody wants to see it. So this can be 3x plus 1, x minus 2. Okay, so there are my two factors now. So if you're not sure what will make 3x plus 1 equal 0, you can just set it equal to 0. So actually, let me make myself a little space. So I can just set each factor equal to 0 and then solve for x, and those will be my solutions. So for this one, I can go ahead and subtract the 1. So I have 3x equals negative 1, divide both sides by 3, and I get x equals negative 1/3. And then for this other one, so maybe I didn't really need to go through the work to solve it, but here are my two solutions. So I have x equals negative 1/3 and x equals 2. Now, like I said, you could have just jumped straight to figuring out the factoring. That would have been totally fine. I just wanted to review another way to do it in case you get thrown off by that. And just as a reminder, my review series has many other topics in it. So like I said, I referenced linear equations and factoring. So each topic has a refresher video, and then you are watching the practice problems video. So everything kind of comes with like a refresher and then also practice. So hopefully you can get everything you need for whatever reason you're reviewing this material. It's all free at dividingconquermath.com. Just go to the review section. But otherwise, I'm going to leave it at that. I'll talk to you guys hopefully in another video. Peace.